now. Really quickly, Faith in Public Life, we're a strategy center for the faith community based in Washington, D.C. We work with faith leaders across a broad spectrum, including a lot of Catholic leaders on issues like we're going to be talking about here today. And I'm our trainings director. It's my job to help lay leaders, activists, and clergy to develop the tools to be the strongest public leaders possible. And what we're talking about today are just some of those skills. And with that, I'll turn it over to Sarah.
Hi, and I'm Sarah Benitez. I'm the Latino Program Director here at Faith in Public Life, and I work with faith leaders across the country on sort of pro-immigrant policies and messages, and then also lifting up Latino faith leaders and lay leaders in different communities on the issues that are important to them.
Great. All right, so now we're going to switch views here away from a camera to a slideshow for a while, and we're going to go step by step through the process of productive, meaningful, compassionate, courageous conversations. So
as Chris mentioned, in the last year, during the election cycle, we saw a rise in rhetoric that was anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant, and then fortunately that coincided as well with crimes or incidences against Muslims or people perceived to be Muslim, or immigrants or people perceived to be immigrant. After the election, these incidents of hate, harassment, intimidation really exploded, and a record 701 incidences were reported to the Southern Poverty Law Center. Some, unfortunately, a high number at schools and college campuses, including one at my alma mater, which was at Wellesley College, where students were harassed by students from another local college, calling them names and using racially tinged derogatory terms without realizing, they later apologized, but sometimes not realizing that those are, there's a reason we don't use that language anymore, or there's a reason why we have, as a society, decide that's not acceptable. Unfortunately, as that still is becoming more common, there's a need for those of us who sometimes are on the sideline or sometimes are hearing these kinds of things being said. It doesn't always start with somebody, maybe saying a hateful thing or doing one of the kinds of incidences that get in the news, but it can even begin in your own sort of extended family, in your own neighborhood, with just common things that are being said about immigrants, about Muslims, about people of another race. And so for those of us who are in a position to be able to talk with people who have these opinions or who are saying things, we are called and asking you to find the way, when it's the right time, when there's the window, when you have a relationship with somebody who you trust, to initiate this kind of conversation. Not one that you're going to change minds right away, but that you at least start to change the tone around. That's the only way that we're going to sort of make sure that these types of incidents decrease.
Yeah, Sarah, I think that's really well put. To just flesh out a quick example of it, my uncle, my dad's brother, recently I heard him offhandedly say a slur about Arab Americans in reference to people in his town. And there was a time in my life when he would say things like that, I would fly off the handle. And we would have like a very, very unproductive conversation that, frayed the fabric of our family. But the skills that we've uncovered through some research over the last year really have transformed the way that I approach this particular dialogue. And I've worked with pastors, particularly across the country, who helped us develop these techniques and put them into practice in their own ministry. So the kind of dialogue that leads to a conversion of the heart or just a reconsideration of the views has some key steps. There's 6 key steps that you can see here on this slide, and we're going to go through what each one of them entails. getting centered, listening, normalizing the awkward, conflicted feelings, modeling the thoughtful approach, and appealing to values, especially shared values rather than just facts and figures. And of course, the importance throughout this process of really being patient and knowing that this is a process. This is not a decision that one makes overnight, because our beliefs are part of who we are. And it takes courage and self-examination and self-critique to change that. So we want to accompany people rather than order them to change. So that's that first step of getting centered is really, really key. If you're hungry, if you're tired, if there's stress at work or school, it's a time to not initiate a conversation about a controversial, emotionally charged issue. So you want to make sure that you're taking care of yourself and that you're well rested and especially well fed before you go through a tense conversation. And if you're angry, if you've got that little butterflies in your stomach and your hands are shaking a little bit, even if it's a moment of when a slur is used or something like that, if you're really feeling that visceral tug, it's a time to not initiate the difficult conversation. Praying or meditation is a good way to get into a good space. And if you're really mad at somebody, just thinking of something you appreciate about them and holding that in your mind for a minute is a good way to get in a more productive mindset. I personally, I meditate on this one verse of scripture to get in the right place. And I'm a Lutheran, and Lutherans love the book of James. But this particular verse, I have it taped up on my wall. I say, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Like, I actually chant that a couple of times before going into a difficult conversation. So like, whatever really nourishes you, drink of it before you go into these conversations. Listening is like the verse says, be quick to listen, is the foundation of any kind of worldview changing process. You want to ask your conversation partner open-ended questions about their beliefs and feelings and their fears, not the yes/no questions that put them in a box. And that gets us into a space where we're really trying to understand where they're coming from, rather than waiting for an opportunity to argue or to rebut or to rebuke, because people can sense that. If you're going into an argument trying to win it, or you're just kind of luring them into making a statement that you can hit them back on, people pick up on that right away, and it's going to shut the conversation down. So searching for the common concerns and the shared values through a listening process is key. And now here's where we get into actual techniques, conversational techniques that diffuse conflict and facilitate mind changing. First is to normalize the conflict. Just name it. If there's a disagreement, it's okay to say, I know we don't always see eye to eye on this particular issue, or when they say that they're angry or about something, or they have strong feelings, just say that it's understandable, or say that you get where they're coming from. Little sound bites like these in the quotation marks here, just get you onto the same page. But there's one key, and that's to avoid using the word "but" in your sentence where you're acknowledging their feelings. As soon as the word "but" comes into a sentence about "I understand where you're coming from," the common ground is erased, and that's hard to do. I have to work on it constantly myself to not butt people at the beginning of a conversation. And then after you are modeling your thoughtfulness and establishing that nature of connection, modeling that you are thinking and that you're considering your views and that your views are well formed, actually activates people's brains to mimic that process themselves. So when you say, when I think about it, that triggers them to start thinking and stop reacting out of visceral emotions such as fear and anger. And these ones, in particular on the screen verbatim, have been shown to work really, really well. We developed this project in concert with a psychologist who really brings to bear ways to activate different parts of the brain. And these are like little steps on the walk toward using your thinking brain rather than your reactive one. So you normalize conflict, you listen, you model thoughtfulness. The next step is to appeal to shared values, and particular values that a lot of people share are pretty much almost universally held. The importance of being a good role model and setting a positive example, the importance of the golden rule, humility, and dignity. These are values that everyone shares, whether you're a liberal, a moderate, or a conservative, a person of faith, a person of no faith. These are things that we all share. And it's best to illustrate values through stories about actually using the values rather than just saying we should follow the golden rule. And these, actually, I wanted to do a quick aside. When we appeal to values, oftentimes the first value we appeal to is compassion. And that's natural. I've done it many, many times myself. We do recommend, though, rather than leading with compassion, leading with these more universally held ones. Sadly, compassion is not as universally held as we wish it were, and also it's susceptible to being rebutted by self-preservation. People choose safety over compassion every time, and that's why you don't see it on this list right here. So just a summary slide of the do's and don'ts here. You want to be patient rather than judgmental, be respectful and try not to take offense, acknowledge conflict without questioning motives, and just talk about values. And facts, I always say facts are like the salt and pepper, not the main course in your conversation. And just make sure that you're coming into it with an intention to influence and to come to accord rather than to win an argument. Even the framing of like changing someone's mind, it makes it seem kind of adversarial or competitive. So I know like when Sarah and I go into conversations like this, we try to scrub ourselves out of the competitive mindset altogether. So there's a couple of resources that we found that we wanted to share recommendations for, and I know Chris can distribute links to these. One is the Southern Poverty Law Center has this really long, thorough resource called Speak Up: Responding to Everyday Bigotry, and the scenarios are so detailed. It's like how to talk to a sibling. Is one page. How to talk to a parent is another. It's a really great resource that's very detailed. It's the sharing the details of it is far beyond the scope of a presentation such as this. But please check it out. And there's another one. There's a podcast. It's actually a politics podcast by the New York Times called The Run Up. But a useful thing in there is it actually has recordings of conversations between family members who disagree about highly charged political issues. And it's just really instructive to see what brings them together and what drives them apart. So I just wanted to share those things in particular.
And Dan and Sarah, I posted those the links to both those resources in the chat function here in folks' Zoom window.
Great. So, all right, now I'm gonna go back to our camera and away from the slides here, so we can so we can get back on the screen and do a little bit of like a role playing of a modeling the conversation. But okay, well, we wanted to have two more additional things as part of the conversation today. One is Sarah and I were going to model using some of these tools to around a conversation around misconceptions about Muslims. And the other is to leave some time for question and answer, which Chris can facilitate via the chat bar. Yeah, so in this conversation, I'm Dan. I'm a senior at Georgetown. I just say Georgetown because we're here in DC. And Sarah is my aunt who I'm seeing on a visit home for Christmas.
Hey, Dan, how's school going? What's new?
School's going great. As a matter of fact, last weekend we had this interfaith service at the chapel with a rabbi and an imam and a priest and a Lutheran pastor, all talking about the importance of unifying after a really controversial election. And I'd never experienced anything before it. I loved it.
An imam, isn't that someone who's Muslim?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. That just seems really dangerous. I mean, I just saw on the news about that student at Ohio State who went and stabbed the other students. A lot of Muslims, you know, their religion supports violence, and there's terrorists. I don't know. That sounds like maybe you shouldn't be doing things like that on campus.
Well, it sounds like a pretty scary thing for you, and I get that. I value being safe just like you do, and I know you feel that way because you love me. And one thing I think about when I'm talking about how to keep us all safe is to do it in a way that brings people together instead of putting all people of one religion into a box.
Well, you know, I hear you, but I just, you know, we're not the ones putting all people in religion in a box. They're the ones doing that to us. And I am worried. I am scared because what if something happened to you or to your parents? You know, there have been terrorist attacks in the United States. That could happen again. And we should be really vigilant. You should be more careful about, you know, if you're spending time with Muslim students on campus or, you know, this imam, you don't know who's a terrorist and who's not.
It is important to be careful. And one thing I think about is to do it in a way that honors what Pope Francis talks about, especially, you know, with the refugees. He actually has refugees from Syria staying in the Vatican. And, you know, I value being safe, of course. And I also want to do it in a way that honors the church teaching.
Yeah, I mean, I saw that too in the news about Pope Francis. And, you know, the thing is, he has an army at the Vatican. He has people to protect him. You know, who's going to protect you on campus or your family, you know, if they're at work or out on the street? That's what I worry about.
Well, I know you worry about it, and I think about it too. We do have a police force on our campus. Look, I know we're not going to solve world peace here today, but can we still meet for breakfast next week?
Yeah, of course.
Oh, thanks, Aunt Sarah. Yeah. Scene.
All right, that was great. You know, one of the questions we get, no one's shared a question yet, but feel free to use the chat bar to pose a question if you'd like on your Zoom window there. One of the questions we get all the time, and I think especially for younger folks who are on social media, is is it possible to have a conversation about these issues that can be meaningful and via social media, or is that just not a good framework or platform for these sorts of conversations?
I mean, my take on that is no. I mean, I think anyone that I've seen try to engage, even in a reasonable way, it eventually escalates. Social media is not a space where you're listening to the other person, exchanging, and really connecting in the way that you are with a face-to-face dialogue. And this model is really, my understanding, you could correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, is built for people that already have a relationship where there's enough trust and that it's in person and more personal so that you can, you know, talk about conversion.
Yeah. I mean, I think relationship is really important. but real relationships can exist primarily over social media too. So I think if you, I mean, in general, you know, doing things face to face. I mean, I'm from the South, and we have this saying that like what comes from the heart goes to the heart, and you know that's very much a face-to-face thing. But if you know somebody, and whether you know them primarily online or primarily offline, before a conversation happens, and you know that they have good intentions at heart, and you know they're not a troll, then I think if you do it cautiously and open-mindedly with these same tools, it can work. I actually had a productive dialogue with a conservative police officer from rural Tennessee about gun control of all things, because we already had a bond over our favorite baseball team.
Great. Well, we had someone who said that they felt your conversation was very loving. And I think, you know, each showed that you cared for each other without getting into a debate. It's difficult to do, but makes sense. Eileen asked a question, said, do you have any advice for how to have these conversations with children, particularly high school age? I'm a public school teacher, and I've noticed many of my students modeling the negative thought process of adults in their life related to these issues.
Do you want to take a crack at that, or shall I?
Go for it if you have a
Yeah, well, I mean, I taught 7th grade rather than high schoolers, but I mean, what I would do there is, number one, modeling. You know, I mean, I know as a teacher, sometimes you have to intervene in a conversation and just kind of shut it down. In order to set the stage for a productive conversation after, like the next time after a shutdown, I just think the modeling in between is really important. And also, everybody gets the golden rule. The golden rule is very intuitive. So you can just say, well, you know, how would you feel if somebody called you a name based on your religion? Is something that, in my experience, people just get. So it's not, you know, it's not a silver bullet, but it's good to change people's thinking.
Well, and do you think, Dan, in terms of modeling, like if you were a teacher, let's say the day after the Ohio State, like that stabbing happened, to come into class and say something like, well, I feel scared when I hear about things like this on the news, but when I, you know, or not using but, right? But, and I try to remember the golden rule, you know, this doesn't mean that everybody of one faith is, you know, a terrorist or something along those lines.
To be honest, I wouldn't rush it. I think, you know, just giving people space to talk about their fear and letting them get it all out there, and resisting the temptation to rebut. But then, you know, after people have had a chance to talk about their fears, say that it's okay to be afraid, and then pivot and take them a step further by thinking about smart ways to get past our fears, and ways to get past our fears that honor our values.
And in your conversation, your mock conversation, you did that. You let Sarah kind of express her fear. You didn't try to stop her or say, wait, just, you know, stop, or something like that, which I think is an important, you know, a person, I think, just I'll add my own thought, a person has to feel that they've been heard, that their perspective has been valued before you can have a conversation about it. So we had a question from Mary, who is from the South as well. Mary said, what are some prompt questions? So prompt questions in quotes that could be used to begin difficult conversations on race, especially between people of different racial and ethnic backgrounds.
So I want to make sure I understand the question correctly. So how to initiate conversations about race where one person is, for example, African-American and the other person is, for example, white. I mean, the relationship definitely comes first. You have to have a real relationship before you can talk across racial lines, typically. And I mean, that's really important. I would say more so than anything else, because you can ask those kind of more pointed questions or like potentially fraught questions if you have that relationship, but just open-endedly saying like, what do you think of race relations in our town, or what is something you feel we could be doing better together around race relations. So you want to make sure you set them up so they don't. So the default answer isn't going to be something that sounds bigoted. So make it about race relations rather than Black people or white people or something like that.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And you talked about you talked about your own, Dan, your own experience of faith as a Lutheran, and that can ground you. And the goal, you talked about the golden rule. Is the golden rule something that you feel permeates different faith traditions? So, for example, if you were to have a conversation with someone of another Christian denomination or another faith tradition, do you feel the golden rule is a crossover framework for dialogue?
Absolutely. I'll go on a short digression here. In advance of Pope Francis's visit to the United States, we commissioned a poll that tested some of the things he says, and just to see how persuasive they are and how much they resonate with people. And we tested beyond the Catholic Church too, and his wording about treating others as we wish to be treated tested very well. I mean, it's weird to like take something that a faith leader says and put it in a poll, but we did it, and it really, really worked to the point where the pollster always tests golden rule, no matter what issue or what population they're talking to now. And then just to the theological aspect of your question, Chris, yes. And I think if you're speaking about it in a more religious context, you want to flesh it out as it's phrased in Scripture, rather than simply saying golden rule. So talking about loving your neighbor as yourself, and was it loving God with all your soul and loving your neighbor as yourself? Is that how it goes? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think don't just say golden rule, flesh it out.
Mm-hmm. And you talked, Sarah, in the example, the conversation example, Sarah cited the Ohio State attack where the young man attacked people with the vehicle and then with the knife. And I think oftentimes our some of these conversations that we either walk into or invite ourselves into, they come soon after a horrific event where someone has made a very a violent and harmful choice that hurt other people. Is that a good time to is there a time to just say this isn't the time to have that kind of conversation, or is it okay to try to engage in a meaningful dialogue with someone in the midst of that? You very much acknowledged, Dan, Sarah's experience of fear and around that incident. Is that productive to engage at that at that point?
It's a different type of engagement in the direct aftermath. I think no, you don't want to go into that deep conversation while people are still afraid, and while our adrenal responses are still going on. We actually have Faith in Public Life. We have colleagues in Columbus who were on campus holding a press conference and a vigil the night of, in order to raise an interfaith voice. And their message from the imams and the pastors was just the commitment to the safety of everyone in the community, including students who are Muslim and Sikh. Sikh, it's pronounced Sikh. But just at that point, just establishing mutual universal care for each other's safety. Because fear is oftentimes involuntary. So sometimes you just need to live in it until it fades.
And I think one other question I would ask before we bring things to a close is, I think oftentimes that these conversations can become affiliated, viewpoints or perspectives can become affiliated with political parties, with politicians, with kind of partisan stances. Is there any way to try to, for lack of a better word, diffuse that polarization of views that often can happen? Is that productive even? Any thoughts? I think specifically about like an example like the immigration issue and, perspectives on it that happen. And I know when I get together with my family, we have strong perspectives on different sides, and it goes quickly to, oh, that's such a liberal idea, or that's such a conservative idea, things like that.
Yeah. I myself am a pretty liberal person. I spend my Christmases every year with the more conservative people in my family, and the way we handle it productively. One is we talk about issues that are dear to us, rather than talking about candidates. And the other thing is just naming the fact that you disagree, because everybody's aware of the disagreement, and it just hangs in the air. And if you don't acknowledge it, so I always say things that, I know we don't agree on everything, and that we're often on the other side, and then talk about why you care. In particular about the issue at hand, and stressing your personal ties to the issue you're talking about is really important. Sarah, you talk about immigration in a way that no partisan talking point could ever get across. When you're trying to have that conversation, what's your general approach?
Well, I think it depends on who it is. If it's someone who I feel like, if they're open to hearing a little bit, then I will tell stories of people who I know who are, hardworking, whose kids are born here in the United States. I'll name them. I'll, fill in all the details that I know about that person, so that it's harder to kind of write off, like, well, all these people are all like this. I think the more we humanize and put the human face, which actually Pope Francis said to do around immigration and around people, is to not see them as numbers, but to tell their stories, to make them real. And then it's a lot harder for someone to say, well, all those people should go. They might say, well, that's not one person, but there's all these other people. And then I'll, if I want to, I'll give another story. Just depends on how far and how much time I want to spend on it. But I might just leave them with that, or say, even the reminder of going back to values. Especially with family, of saying, well, when we were at Mass on Christmas Eve, and, Father so-and-so was telling us about how the Holy Family was then, they were like migrants, and that they had to flee into exile. That's what I reflect on. So kind of bringing it back to our shared faith or shared values.
Yeah. Actually, that reminds me of another thing that I do, and that is you make it about children. People, talking about the example we set for our kids, or the things we want for our kids, because whether you're liberal or you're conservative, we all, we want basically the same things for our children. So connecting your views to future generations is really important, and that's why. And you'll see that in messaging on a lot of issues. Sarah, you're talking about how immigration affects children. People talk about how climate change affects future generations. It's right up there with the golden rule as a thing to hit on that's a shared value across lines.
Great. We just had a note from another Sarah, who just was grateful for the discussion, and said she works at a public university, but is Christian, and has a husband who's a Muslim immigrant. So she was just grateful for interfaith, or a faith-based perspective. So anyway, Dan and Sarah, I want to say thanks. We just to let folks know, we'll be sending out an email with that 2-page document that kind of sums up Dan's points. But really quickly, Dan, if you could sum up if you kind of could sum it up in 30 seconds, or your elevator pitch for folks as they walk away. Are there a few things you would say? Like, if you can't remember anything else from the past 45 minutes, what should they remember?
To put the relationship first. It's about improving your accord with your loved ones without sacrificing or apologizing for your views. So put the person at the center and make it a process rather than a debate about a political issue.
Great. Thanks so much. Again, Dan and Sarah, thanks so much. We'll be sending out the two